Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Sabir Sultan, and I'm the Associate Director of Literary Programs at the World Voices Festival at PEN America. PEN America is an organization whose mission is to unite writers and their allies to celebrate the power of the written word and champion the freedom to write and read. For those of you who are new to PEN America, we are a member-driven organization. We have members in every U.S. state and chapter cities across the country, from Detroit to Tulsa and from Birmingham to Miami. We welcome all of you to help bring our mission to life. If you haven't yet, please visit our membership table located right over there in the corner of the event space. It is my pleasure to welcome you tonight to PEN Presents Murong Xuecun with Jiayang Yvonne. This program would not have been possible tonight without the support of our partner McNally Jackson. If you have yet to purchase a copy of Murong's book, Deadly Quiet City, True Stories from Wuhan, you can purchase a copy tonight using your vouchers. Vouchers can be used anywhere in the store, including the cafe, which is open until 9 p.m. And Murong will be signing after the event right behind this backdrop over here. And so, tonight we are honored to have with us Murong for a discussion of his new book, Deadly Quiet City. When a strange new virus appeared in the largest city in central China late in 2019, the 11 million people living there were oblivious to what was about to hit them. But rumors of a new disease soon began to spread, mostly from doctors. In no time, lines of sick people were forming at the hospitals. At first, the authorities downplayed medical concerns. Then they locked down the entire city and confined people to their homes. From Beijing, Murong, one of China's most popular writers, silenced by the regime in 2013 for his outspoken books and the New York Times articles, followed the state media, fearing the worst. Then on April 6, 2020, he made his way quietly to Wuhan, determined to look behind the heroic images of sacrifice and victory propagated by the regime to expose the fear, confusion, and suffering of the real people living through the world's first and harshest COVID-19 lockdown. Murong is one of China's most famous contemporary authors. His works include The Missing Ingredient, Leave Me Alone, Dancing Through Red Dust, and Deadly Quiet City. He wrote a New York Times opinion column from 2011 through 2016, and has also written for The Guardian. He lives in Australia. Joining Murong in conversation tonight is Jiayang Yvonne. Jiayang is a staff writer at The New Yorker, where she's worked since 2010. She's had worked on her first book, Motherland, to be published by FSG. Our thanks to Wayne Gong for providing interpreter services tonight. I also want to thank our interpreters from Pro Bono ASL for helping us make this evening accessible to a wider range of audience members. And so, without further ado, let me turn the stage over to Murong, Jiayang, and Wayne.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here tonight. I just want to say that if you catch me looking at my phone, I promise you it's not because I'm looking at Instagram. I do not have a printer, so all my notes are on my phone. So that is, so I am, I'm not tweeting or Instagramming the moment, I promise. I just wanted to start by thanking Murong for being here and for writing this, you guys. For writing this very honest book about one of the most difficult times in recent history, and what I particularly appreciate about this book is its diversity of voices. I didn't know what to expect. I mean, I knew Murong to be a very fine writer, but what I hope for those of you who haven't read the book, what I hope that will make you kind of want to buy and stick with the book is just the fact that he finds voices that you don't always hear or read, in newspapers, magazines, and the level of access that he is able to secure to everyone from doctors to janitors to a motorcycle taxi driver, kind of in the gray market. I mean, these are voices that you don't normally hear from China, and I'm so grateful to Murong for being able to, for allowing us to spend so much time with voices to which we would not ordinarily have an opportunity to hear from, and that's what I think makes this book so remarkable. It's because as China becomes increasingly significant and also at times very hostile seeming, I find it increasingly more important that we are able to hear from people in this vast country that do not speak, not only do not speak English, but would not ordinarily ever be interviewed in China. And for that, I think Murong has done us a great service in being able to capture such beautiful and honest portraits of these people who are very rarely allowed voices. Without further ado, I think Murong is going to read an excerpt, or no? What was the plan?
Let's talk.
Okay. Okay. Then, well, that's good news for me because I have so many questions for Murong. I wanted to ask, you are such a gifted writer of contemporary China and disillusionment. I'm sure that before going to Wuhan, you had certain expectations, maybe perhaps of what you would find. My first question is, how did reporting and writing this book change or conform to your expectations of what Wuhan would be before going there?
Sorry, I have to switch to Chinese. 在COVID 开始之后呢，我一直住在北京，跟所有被吓坏的中国人一样的，我在2个月里，几乎没有离开过自己的家。
Before I go to Wuhan, I stayed in Beijing for 2 months, like any scared Chinese people. That's right.
Like most of the terrified Chinese, I had hardly ever left my house, and one day I finally went out, and I was scared or terrified, frightened by what I saw. In Beijing, the streets are always so wide, but at the time I couldn't find any single person or car on one street. So the whole city is like a ghost town. I have lived in Beijing for more than 10 years, and I have never seen such a Beijing, such a scene. So I couldn't help thinking what the life was like in Wuhan, in a city that was locked down by our President Xi Jinping, and leaving 11 million people to suffer for 76 days. And it was at the time that Clive Hamilton, a friend of mine, an Australian professor, called and suggested that I go to Wuhan to explore and interview, and then to write a book to tell the world what was really happening there. And therefore, I made a plan, and I bought the tickets, and silently I went to Wuhan.
Did being in Wuhan and writing the book, was there anything unexpected about being there compared to kind of what you thought Wuhan would be like before going?
There's so many things. Basically, everything was different from my thought. When I was in Wuhan, my biggest concern was not the virus, but our government. Several we-called citizen journalists, they have entered Wuhan before me. They photographing the tragic situations of dead bodies piling up. They criticizing the inhumane and epidemic prevention policies. But it didn't take long for them to disappear one by one. One of them is Feng Bin. Feng Bin, who risked his life to enter a hospital and photographing the dead bodies and making so many brave statements. And then he disappeared. From February 2020 to 2 months ago, from the April 2023, for more than 3 years, nobody knows where Feng Bin is, what he experienced, or even better, he's dead or alive. During those times, I often thought that what happened to Feng Bin would probably happen to me, because we were doing the same thing. I felt fear all the time. I always suspected that I was watched, followed, and backed. This kind of fear was not unique to just me. In this book, there's a character, Yang Mi, who lost her only daughter. When I invited her for an interview in my hotel room, she looked up uneasily all the time. And then she asked, "Is this room bugged?" To be honest, I really didn't know. So what I could do was to, as careful as possible. So, I always use the most secure communication apps I could find. I never talked about my work on the phone. Sometimes I use a blanket to cover my head and then they received a phone call. Every time I left my room, my house, I stuck a small piece of paper in the doorway so that I could have known if someone had come. The whole journey was so terrifying.
Yeah. Well, first of all, is anyone else as impressed as I am by Murong's English? Like, is anyone else just kind of flabbergasted by how well he speaks English?
Doesn't sound like you're living in Australia at all.
Australian accent. No time to buy.
I'm deeply impressed by how quickly you've learned English. But that fear is a central subject of this book, and fear, really fear of the virus, and versus fear of the society, kind of the controls of the society, really are these two ends of the terror that everyone seems to feel in Wuhan at the time that you are reporting. And I think you were quite honest in talking about your own fear. How do you feel fear is normalized in a society like China's in the midst of a pandemic? I don't know if that requires translation, normalized.
Do you like it?
I can understand.
这个正常化，让这个
And how does that express itself? Like the normalization of fear. How do people navigate? What is their greater fear? The virus, or the government, or economic, decline? I mean, how do people make sense of these different kinds of fear in Wuhan?
It's a difficult one to answer. My feelings like this. No one's asked a shop owner, how did you feel during the lockdown? How did you see the placement, the place, and the government? Sometimes they can speak of their fear, but at the end, they always praise the government. Our government is so great. I must give it a high score. Compared with the American government, the British government, you can see how great our government is. Something like that. No, it's difficult to tell if they really mean this. If they really mean this. But I suppose that the fear must has done its work.
Yeah, I was struck. I mean, one of my favorite. The book is made up of portraits of.
Sorry, another thing. Until recent years, in Beijing, even in the private gatherings, we didn't mention Xi Jinping's name directly. We used this gesture. It was like one person said, one man said, I will tell you something about him. You know who I mean? The others, yes, we know. Please tell me something about him. So you can see that even in the private gatherings, even in the family party, it's like Voldemort in Harry Potter. You know who? We didn't speak his name.
Yeah, no, I think that, especially, I know that in WeChat groups and social media groups, even greater fear about spelling out his name. I mean, even codes for his name are always being censored, whether, Pooh the bear or, whatever.
For the king. We need the king. We need the emperor. And both. Yeah. Both means steam bond.
Oh, I didn't know about that.
And Xi Jinping has many nicknames, and the most popular one is the stupid bond. And by now, if you post both the stupid bond on Weibo, Chinese Twitter, WeChat, it's hard to say what you will experience. Probably you will be arrested. Even this simple 2 words.
I thought one of the most interesting portraits. I mean, the book is comprised of 8 portraits of 8 people, and one of the most interesting one is actually of a party member who in his interviews with you continued to praise the government despite getting sick, despite being separated from his family, isolation, separated from his daughter. I'm really glad you included his portrait. I mean, because from your telling, there was an earnestness. I mean, he did say, well, I am a rational man and the government is doing the best they can with these given circumstances that they are encountering. And the only clues that we have as to his emotional state, are, he confesses to having had 2 emotional breakdowns,
Yeah.
which are just, which is a byword for crying.
Yes.
He really couldn't even admit that he had shed tears out of desperation. When I read that portrait, I wondered, do you think that in his heart of hearts, he truly feels that way? Is it self-deception, or is it self-denial? I mean, it's very hard. I mean, do you think that if he were having a conversation with himself, it would be the same conversation that he was having with you? I mean, what is do you think that he feels it is truly in his heart of hearts he feels differently about the Chinese government?
The character Jiayang mentioned it's Wang Gangcheng, and Wang Gangcheng, he is a middle-class man and has a good family and has a good job, and I guess he really likes the Communist Party. But sometimes he knows that he has fear of the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. It's normal. It's normal that people have double thinking in a state like China. So sometimes our people love the CCP, but hate it at the same time. No, it's the same thing. When I was in Wuhan, I asked so many people to give an interview, but many of them refused. It's especially the doctors and the nurses. My friend introduced me to a doctor who has been infected yet still working during the lockdown. I'm pretty sure that he must have seen so many dead bodies. But when I asked for an interview, he was like, forget it, buddy. It's really isn't convenient. What did he mean by inconvenient? I think I can tell you this. At the time, our government has issued extremely strict orders to the doctors and nurses, forbidding them to give interviews to anyone. And anyone who dared to disobey must be severely punished. So I told the doctor that I completely understand. I just hope that one day you will be able to tell me about what you have seen, what you have heard, your experience and your feelings. He went silent, and then he replied softly, I hope so too, brother." That makes me think a lot, makes me think about the whole thing, how the fear passed through for our government to the doctors and nurses and even ordinary people. I even asked an official to give an interview. She told me that let me think about it over and over. And finally, she told me that, sorry, I can't be interviewed by you because we have no principles.
Yeah, I mean, I think that my feeling kind of overwhelmingly of reading this book is that Orwellian doublethink, and how that has just become an instrument of survival in this society. And survival, also is a very, the meaning of survival becomes a really interesting question in this book. And one of my other, favorite portraits is of the motorcycle driver, taxi driver. I mean, basically, Wuhan is paralyzed, and there are these motorcycle drivers functioning the gray market. They take, when they can take people to places when the city is under lockdown. And I thought it was such a complex psychological and moral portrait of this man. I mean, I felt like he was every man in the sense that he doesn't have very much. He's a working class man. He's just trying. I mean, he said, I think one of his lines is, you know what's more scary than the virus? Not having food on the table. And that's what makes him continue to basically ferry people from hospital to their residence. And then I thought it was so interesting when he didn't want to tell you about the way that he sometimes upcharges, people, during this time of crisis. He really, and I just thought, what is it like to have a conscience in an authoritarian regime during a once, in a lifetime plague? I mean, and he did, I thought it was so interesting. I mean, you can talk more about this. He didn't want to tell you about, how much he upcharged these people. And he only wanted to tell you when he took people from one place to another for free or at a normal rate. What was the conversation with him like? I mean, and do you judge him for kind of for profiteering during a mortal crisis, or do you think this is the only way of survival? When you're living in Wuhan during the plague. I mean, what was your thought process when you were interviewing him?
That man's name, I know his name, but without his permission,
Yes.
I can only call him Laoli, the elderly. His business is not legal in our country, so it's basically an illegal job, like a cat in the like a mouse in a cat house, like that. He in the normal days he charges people with about 10 RMB or 20, but during the lockdown. He charged the customer 100 or 50.
When people were dying, like when people were really in crisis, having to go,
But still, they had the need to go to another place,
Yes.
and there are no
other ways of transportation.
links. So Lolly has done this job, and not only for money, I guess. Some in deep in my mind, I guess it's for some responsibility, because he told me that he sometimes felt that he has these responsibilities to help people. On April 1st, 2020, he helped a deaf man to leave Wuhan. It's not easy because the whole city was locked down, and nobody can leave without permission. But Lolly, like the smuggler, so like a smuggler, he always has his method, has his way to help people leave. And he find another illegal driver called Qin Qin. They help the disabled man to leave the city, but they didn't charge him. And when Lolly told me this story, he seemed so bright, so bright. And then I couldn't help think about the Kafka's book trial, the castle.
Yes.
And I told him the stories of the castle. Lolly likes this story. The elderly likes this story, but why he likes this story? Because he thinks it's just like in China, like in China. But he didn't think that the K, the character of the castle, the K's problem is not that cannot be solved. He told me that if there is illegal motor driver, everything will be solved. And his gesture is like this, everything solved.
Yeah, I mean that story. I mean that was his life. I thought was one of the most interesting because there was so much moral murkiness. I mean, he seemed to live in this. His job is to function in this gray economy, and he does have these these moments of conscience of conscience when he takes a disabled person out. But then there are other moments when he's upcharging people. Because he realizes there's great demand. I mean, you mentioned Kafka. I think our last question before I open it up to the audience. In your most, I think, heartbreaking portrait of this mother who loses her daughter, Young Mi, during the pandemic. After her daughter dies, what she wants is a sense of justice.
Yeah.
And I think she says, I don't want to take down the government. I have no interest in political affairs. I don't really care about politics, but what I want is a sense of justice for my daughter. And that's such a universal impulse, but also, what is the meaning of justice in China? I mean, do you think the justice that this mother is seeking, I mean, is it ever possible in China? And how did it feel to interview her when she's talking about this theoretical justice that she's after when her daughter's already dead?
Now, in January 2020, the government and the officials repeatedly told people that the virus is not infectable, it's safe, it's controllable, so nothing need to be worried. And it was at the time that Yang Min sent her daughter into the hospital, the best hospital in Wuhan, but also the most dangerous hospital. And several days later, his daughter
is infected, yeah.
Infected and has gone. So Yang Mi always thought that it's their fault. If they had told me that this virus is dangerous, I wouldn't have sent my daughter to the hospital. So it's them that killed my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And then they kept protesting. One day she went to the Wuhan Shui, the
city committee.
The city committee, to protest, and the guards arrested him, and then for several hours, and then released her. And she did this job online on Weibo, and being harassed, being threatened, and being put under house arrest.
So because she, just to clarify, it's because she takes her story to a social media platform, and that violates the government. I mean, that is very threatening to the government to have someone tell such a personal story of losing a daughter because of the.
She wanted the officials, especially the Wuhan government officials, to be punished because their lies. But this cannot be reality.
Yes.
And Yang Min's story has a different ending. She is now in Dutch in Holland.
In Holland.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
He illegally left China.
Oh.
She became a smuggled illegal immigrants of Dutch.
That's not mentioned. It's not in the book.
No, it's happened recently.
Recently, okay.
Recently, and she asked a copy of this book because she can use this as the evidence.
Evidence of what?
She's
asylum or to?
She's applying for the political
asylum.
asylum. Yeah.
I thought the most poignant. I mean, because I mean, I'm a little bit older than her daughter. So she's, she's a woman, I think in her 50s, 60s, right? Like early 60s maybe?
This year, her age is 53.
Yeah, her daughter is very, is quite young.
She died at the age of 26.
Of 26, yes. And I thought there was such a poignant line when she says, I did everything, I mean, speaking to the government, I did everything you said. You said I could only have one child. I followed the one-child policy. My daughter is my heart. She is my life. Yeah. And I mean, there was just so much pain and exasperation when she said, I have followed your rules to the letter time and again. And by following your rules,
all my life.
Yeah. I essentially, by following your rules, these rules killed my daughter, and just kind of her absolute anguish. She said, all I ever wanted was to follow your rules. Yeah. Like I do not want to be a political activist. I just want to live a really ordinary life. And I think for someone like her, I think she says, I just want justice, and I want it to be acknowledged that what you have done is a crime against humanity, like lying to me in this way. And I just thought, in some ways, like her daughter, her 26-year-old daughter, becomes kind of a symbol of every human in China. When she says, I just want a justice for this crime against humanity. And it just, that was a story that I thought, so, at least for me, so touched at that, at kind of, for the Chinese, every man, every woman, their desire to just live this ordinary life, but their inability to do so when the rules are so arbitrary, and when following them can sometimes lead, to the death of you or your children.
To me, the most touching moment is about Jin Feng. Jin Feng, she was 61 years old and worked as a cleaner in the hospital. In late January 2020, she got infected and thought that her best option was to commit suicide, because the treatment would cost a lot and she couldn't afford it. And also, she would probably infect her husband and her son. And later, after much persuading from her husband, she gave up the idea of suicide. And in the next week, she and her husband woke up at 4 o'clock every morning, and then rode the bicycles to a hospital 7 kilometers away to receive treatment. It was an extremely difficult and dangerous journey. And his husband soon became infected and then died.
Yeah, I think that's what what was so heartbreaking about that was that she thought, and her husband, in to persuade her not to commit suicide, said, your life is my life too. I want to, I will use all my strength to save you from this illness. And then she ends up infecting, essentially her husband. And while she's recovering, her husband is the one who dies. And I think she just had so much anger and sadness, exasperation. She said, well, you said that you would live for me. You would save me, and why is it that I cannot save you with my life? And they also had a disabled son, right? So it just, these stories of just really ordinary people who want nothing to do with the politics of the society, who do not want to make trouble in Chinese parlance, but whose lives are just pulled apart even as they're trying to follow every single rule of the society. Yes.
I'll pass the mic around.
Yes. Does anyone have questions? I know that we've been doing a lot of talking. we could keep on talking forever, but we wanted to. Yes, go on.
I was wondering what we don't need. I was just wondering, obviously what's going on in China is so worthwhile and so worthy of reporting on, but I was thinking about how it's also your home, and I was wondering how it feels to write, to expose what's going on in a place that I imagine have like an emotional connection to as well.
你写在家里的感觉，你写作在家里的感觉，你自己有什么感觉？
就是说，这也是你的，就是说你在写关于中国也是你的家，所以就是说你有没有任何矛盾感？关于就是说你在写，就是感情上面，就是你在写关于你的家。
I think the most important work for me is to tell the stories of the people. So what people suffered, what people have been through, is the most important thing. To criticize the Communist Party and our government, it's an important work. It's an important job. But for me, I think I'm a novelist, and I write about the people's struggle, people's torment, and sometimes people's resistance that was doomed to fail. That's my job. So, I could add something about Jinfeng. The last story. I went to their home, their poor house, humble house. I heard her crying. I saw her tears and her 40-year disabled son, Xialei. At the end of the interview, I asked her what her plans were for the future. She replied that her only hope was to get a disability certificate for her son before her death. And she told me that this, so that he would be able to live on after I die.
Yeah, I think, so much of the book is one about kind of different kinds of survival and what it means to live and to live on. You have the mother who loses her daughter, and she feels like seeking justice is a way for her daughter to live on. And then you have, the other mother who has this disabled son who thinks the only way she can live on is if she can ensure that after she dies, her disabled son has a means of living on. So I thought that was such an interesting interrogation of what it means to kind of live on in modern China. Are there any other questions? Yes.
Thanks so much. I am curious to see if you have thought much about how your work with American audiences. During COVID, our then president talked about COVID and used racial epithets to describe where it was coming from, and conflated the idea of the Chinese government response with China as an ethnic group and civilization. And today, we're increasingly seeing U.S. and China rivalry. And so I think there are some people in the country who, when they read about criticism of government policies or something like that, they just say, we'll use that to treat Chinese people as other and alien. Presumably, these people are not reading a lot of Chinese writers. But I'm curious if you have thoughts about, whether if you think about how your work is received by Americans in this political context, if this is something you think about when you write, if this is something you think about when you speak with American audiences, or if this is something you see as not part of your mission as a writer whose work is also read in the United States and elsewhere.
Political issues is not my biggest concern. I think my work is mostly for literature. So if some politicians would use this as a political tool, it's not my thing, right? I tell the American readers, and as same as I told the stories to the Chinese readers. I want my readers to know that there are so many people live like this, not for politics but for reality. You should know that in our world, in this real world, there's so many people are suffering. There's so many people are struggling, and there are so many people, fighting, but failed. That's my purpose, my most important goal.
Yes.
Hi, I have a question. Thank you so much for sharing. I was a Beijing-based reporter before coming to the US in 2021, before COVID and during the first half of COVID. And then I know the difficulty of reporting about China and deciding, say, whether to get close to China or be at a standpoint which is stand to observe China from distance. And then also I chatted to people that writers or filmmakers try to do work on COVID. They also struggle with finding the right timing because write something right after COVID or let people process the whole events after a few years, the outcome might be different. So I wonder from your point of view, how do you decide what is sort of a proper point of observation on COVID in China, and also on the public, the timing for writing and publishing? What's your consideration when you are producing the work?
Well, I think as of right now, I'm not sure how safe it is for me to go back to China. Maybe not totally conveniently, not a question I have to think about kind of in the immediate future. But I think there is that tension between wanting to bring clarity to the English-speaking audience about the relationship between China and the U.S., China and Russia. I mean, what it means for the U.S. and the Western world, and also wanting to really give a nuanced, complex portrait that is not reducible to these are the bad guys, these are the good guys, this is the relationship, this is who you should root for. I think that meaningful reporting, meaningful stories do take time to produce, and there will necessarily be a lag between what has happened and how the story of the events is digested, processed, and then brought to the page. I think, of course, we need the New York Times to give us kind of in real time what is happening, kind of what what is going on in any particular moment. But the kind of analysis and the retrospective reflection about sort of the import, the significance of an event, I think that never really becomes totally lucid until some amount of time has passed between the event and afterwards. So I think when you're closer to the event, you want to report as accurately as possible, and you do want to deliver a sense to people on the other side of the world, like this is what's happening. But that is very different from analysis, and I think that does take a much longer period of time. So I think readers, hopefully, will be patient enough to kind of expect different kinds of writing depending on the time frame and how long has passed between the event and the reporting.
To me, writing is kind of art, and a book is like a painting. So to the artists, I think if you read my book, you can get not only the truth, not only the facts, but also the feelings. The feelings that artist face his job, his work. So there's no perfect time to publish this book. If the no perfect timing for this book. The best one is now, and the next is tomorrow. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I guess my question is more about, China lifted the zero COVID policy in the beginning of 2023. And subsequently, a lot of people, basically, I feel like almost the whole nation, everyone's getting COVID. So I was wondering, have you ever thought about covering stories of people who got infected after China lifted its zero COVID policy? Because I feel like the outcome, which is everyone getting COVID, was made the whole zero COVID policy a joke. For example, my family in Guangzhou, they followed all the rules throughout the 3 years, and in January this year, everyone got COVID except our dog. So I don't know. I feel like there's also more story to be uncovered. People's what do people think? Do they still think China is so great in sort of enforcing zero COVID policy? Did China do a good job? So I was just wondering what's your thoughts on the sort of post zero COVID policy era.
我就是这个清零政策。
So I wonder if your dog is okay.
Yeah, my dog.
I have written an article for the Guardian in the Guardian to tell the whole thing of the zero policy, the zero COVID policy. I would rather to tell a story of a friend of mine. This man was a successful businessman. He owned 3 big gyms and several coffee shops in Shenzhen. And since the epidemic, he closed his shops and the gyms one by one because he just couldn't afford it. And then after 3 years, the zero COVID policy, he's totally broken. Now he sold all his, the chairs, the tables for all the things, and then work as a customer manager in the shop, and drive over in the night. He owed a huge debt that he must work for 17 years to pay for. And his mother died. His partner died. His business partner died. But still, he never publicly said a word to criticize the government for the policy. Why? He told me this. I have a wife. I have 2 children. My father was 70-year-old and his leg had some problem. So I have to make a living so that I cannot say a single word. So I think most of the Chinese people are like this.
Yeah, I think that's really good. That's a good question. I think you're right. Infections, continue to proliferate in China. Maybe, people are not, hopefully dying at the same rates, but I think that along with kind of just dealing with the illness itself, China has really refined its digital control and become very sophisticated in its QR code identification system, and that has serious repercussions for this country of 1.4 billion and how they are policed in increasingly just minute ways. The pandemic, on top of everything else, has almost expedited the refinement of the technology of surveillance, and that makes the country, I think, a very difficult place to live in. If you have if you have any desire to have a voice, and I think that will only continue for the foreseeable future. And I think that story really deserves to be followed. We were discussing before, we were chatting before the event, me and Murong, just about sort of, whether China's headed towards war, and just the future looks really quite grim, but I think it's in these times that I'm so grateful for Murong's stories. It's in these times that we have all the more need for these stories to be told from people whose voices are largely smothered by forces of power. And on that note, I think thank you so much everyone for coming, and please pick up a copy. Oh, yes.
Maybe one more?
Here.
Oh,
sorry.
We have some.
And on that note, even with all their voices being silenced, yet there were protests and protests. And some may argue the lift of zero COVID policy might be the direct or indirect consequences of those protests in China and everywhere else, like by Chinese overseas, mostly driven by young people, like college students. Of course, this book, I assume, is not published in China, or
no, not at all.
If, like, in the imaginary world, where your message and all the stories can be available to any ordinary Chinese, what would you tell them? What's your message, especially to those who protested, and even those who protested and being prison right now?
你会告诉这些中国人什么东西？这些有这个抗议的人。
I'm thinking about to make this book, and a PDF, and then send it to inside the Great Firewall, and to let people read. And I already started this. So I guess many of the Chinese can read it now in Chinese, in the Chinese version. Also, I have a plan to write a book about the brave protesters, the warriors, for the youth who took to the street to protest against the Communist Party, against Xi Jinping. They have yielded the bravest word since 1989, the Tiananmen accident, that stepped down Xi Jinping and down the CCP in Shanghai. I was really shocking to hear this. Remarkable.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a good question. I mean, if I could just add, I think what I would, as someone who is seen as a persona non grata in China for my reporting about China, I think what I actually would want to tell Chinese readers is that I don't have a particular message. I think the point is that I do not have a message of glorifying the West or saying, hey, it's so much better here. I think what I want to say is I want you to read as many different sources of information as possible so that you can decide for yourself what, and also see the imperfections of the West and how they compare to whatever's going on in China. Like, that is the whole point, not of my writing, not to convince you of what to believe, but to encourage you to try to decide for yourself if I am worthy of being believed, or if I'm worthy, like if you feel like you can be in conversation with my writing in some way. Like I think that is the only thing I would ever want to tell Chinese readers or readers anywhere. Like don't hopefully, you know, whatever you're reading initiates a dialogue in your head with like whether, you know, what I'm saying is plausible or not, and encourages you to, you know, write for yourself or find out more information for yourself. I think that is you know, really you know, I think that is probably the only reason I write, and that it is very different from the Chinese. I feel like you know, when I'm attacked online, they feel like, oh, you're just preaching the American or Western gospel. You are trying to convince me the West is better. And I think, no, like that, you know, you're misunderstanding kind of the whole reason why I want to write, which is not to convince you to believe anything, but rather to encourage you to judge for yourself whether I should be believed at all.
Just ignore the little pigs.
Yeah, and on that note, I think we're going to wrap up. But thank you so much for coming.